There was this individual in the past named William Paley, and he came up with what's known as a design argument for God or for life being designed. And that is, he looked at life and the way the ecosystem works, and it just seems so amazingly designed. The appearance of design is something that's generally agreed across the board, whether you are a complete materialist and believe that life arose through an evolutionary process, or whether you believe that there's an intelligent mind behind the universe. The appearance is there. So they generally grant the appearance, but the common response is that Darwin basically laid to rest the design argument that William Paley used the idea of a watch. If you're walking along and you find this watch, and I'm paraphrasing his argument here, just laying somewhere in the forest or in a field of grass, you pick it up and you look at it and you can see that, wow, this looks like there's something different about this. It looks very much designed, and therefore there must be a designer behind this watch. What is the watchmaker? The Darwinist will come along and say, well, actually, Charles Darwin laid that to rest. Darwin showed how we can actually have life look so incredibly fine-tuned and designed, but it's all done through a Darwinian process. So that was the theory that Darwin put forward in his Origin of Species. And so it's commonly thought that, okay, we've dispensed with the argument from design for the existence of some sort of an intelligent creator. Wait a sec, hold it right there. That actually is not true. It's actually an urban myth at this point that Darwin actually explained the design-like look of, say, the biological life forms. Here's why it's failed. When we listen to a creative story, it remains a creative story unless we can test and verify it in a repeatable way. In other words, there's a difference between a scientific explanation and science fiction. A scientific explanation is an explanation. It can start as a creative story, but then you go and test it out. You can verify that this works, and you can do it in a repeatable way. Then it transitions from just a creative story into a scientific explanation. But if you can't verify that, if you can't reproduce that in real life, then it remains just a creative story, and you can classify it as science fiction. And here's our problem. We should be able to reproduce the evolution of novel species and genera and so forth. We should be able to do that in theory if Darwin was right. Now, the standard response is, well, yeah, but it takes millions of years. Well, there's a standard response to that, and that is, yes, it takes millions of years because it's just a blind, unguided process. In fact, Richard Dawkins wrote a short book called The Blind Watchmaker, emphasizing that you can have basically nature and natural selection, and it doesn't have anything in mind because it doesn't have a mind, and it's not looking to see where it goes. It just produces more offspring than what can survive. And so those that are able to reproduce more effectively, those are the ones that remain. And if there's mutations and so forth, that can sort of change and evolve. And eventually you get a new species or a new genus and so forth. If we eliminate the chance factor, and that's why it takes millions of years, because it's just a totally blind process that's unguided. It's a mindless process, mindless and blind. Depends on chance events in the environment such that this particular variety will do better than that variety and so forth. Well, in science, we can radically speed up a process by eliminating chance from it. For example, this could, in theory, be produced by chance. I mean, the probability is vanishingly small, but it could be produced by chance. But if you wanted to produce it by chance, you would probably require billions of years, maybe millions of universes. The probability is so small, but eventually you could do that if you had enough trials, because it's just being produced by chance. Now, in real life, we produce these all the time. And that's because in the factory, they're not relying on chance to produce this. They eliminate all that. And we can do that when we simulate evolution in the lab or through selective breeding. We can vastly, by orders of magnitude, accelerate the evolutionary process. And when we do that, what we do in every case is we hit a wall, a genetic barrier. And that is, there's only so much information encoded into the DNA of a particular species. And it allows for an enormous amount of variation, enormous amount. but you're stuck with the genes, the protein coding genes that are already there. If you want to produce something new, you're going to have to invent an entirely new gene that codes for a novel protein. And that is where the problem lies. That is where you have to rely on chance for that. You can't just rely on nature to fine tune and through natural selection produce a novel gene. It gets really technical at this point, but the bottom line is this, is that Charles Darwin did not, in fact, do away with the design argument for life. It was a creative story, and it still remains a creative story. It works nicely for, let's say, explaining variation within a given species, beautifully. Darwinian theory works beautifully for variation within a given species, but it has utterly failed as an explanation to produce an entirely novel, well, let's go with genus, for example. The species is our definition, and that is up for discussion sometimes, what constitutes the definition of a novel species. But certainly by the time you get to a novel genus, then it's bottom line is, if you need entirely new genes encoding entirely novel, stable folding proteins, you've hit a wall. And that's why Darwin actually has not explained how life looks so well designed.